Something that I've never tried because it takes a lot of time is risotto, and today we're going to do that. We're going to incorporate a lot of vegetables in it. Sometimes it has meat in it. If you look at recipes, you'll find that some well-known cooks have very stringent rules that you must follow exactly along for in order for it to be just right, and others, they're very much more loose. In some respects, it's very much like pasta in that there's a lot of variation from person to person. Some cases it'll be very runny, almost soupy, and in other cases it'll be thick enough to scoop. So I think you can remove the tension from you if you've always been a little bit concerned about doing this, because it might be a little bit tricky. It's real flexible, and you can, whatever you come up with is probably, you can just tell people that's the way it's supposed to be. One of the things about this kind of dish is that it incorporates rice, and it incorporates rice in a little bit different way than most of us are used to. What I have here is a tablespoon of olive oil. In some areas they would use butter. Olive oil works equally well and is better for you. And then about 1/4 of a cup of onion, and I'm bringing it just to a simmer. I'm going to let it saute just a little bit here. While that's happening, I've got a small zucchini, and I've got that cubed in about 1/2 inch, 1 inch chunks, and a carrot, one small carrot that's chopped into bite-sized pieces. We're just going to stir those together well and set them aside for the moment. Now, the way that the rice is incorporated a little bit differently is that we want it to be creamy. And so we're using a rice called arborio rice, which is different than most of the kinds of rices that we have. And I'm going to stir it together until it just becomes opaque. You can see that it started out to be a very white rice, and as it becomes darker, what's happening is that the oil is coating each of the kernels of rice, and that's going to prevent or slow down the amount or the rate that the rice absorbs the liquid, so that you have the opportunity for the starch to be released slower. And this starch is more of an amylopectin, which is a shorter, branchier rice than the kind of starch that's in long grain rice or the traditional rice. And so you get the starch released slower, and it becomes more creamy. The kernels should all be separate, and it should always be al dente, or just means that it still has some resistance. Now at this point we're going to add about 1 tablespoon of lemon juice to that, and when that is absorbed, which will happen very, very quickly, I'm going to stir in about a small clove of garlic that's been chopped up really well, and we'll let those go together for about 1 minute. Or in this case, we're going to make it a little bit shorter so that we can move along a little bit more quickly. Now at that point, we're also going to add about half of the vegetables that we chopped up. Now there'll be some more vegetables that we're going to add later, and the original recipe calls at this point for us to also add half of the asparagus. We've got about 6 small stalks of asparagus that we're going to add, but I want them to stay crisper, and particularly the tips. So I'm saving them to add later on when we add a few of the other vegetables and the other half of these. These we're also going to cook, or you would cook for about a minute in order to get them started and softening up. And I'm just going to go ahead and move on with this. We're going to add the broth. Now here's one of the trickier stages with risotto, in that we want to add the broth about 1/2 cup at a time. And you want to make sure that as you add it, you continue to stir, and you will pretty much let all of the liquid evaporate before you add any more. We're eventually going to add, about 3 cups of chicken broth. You may need a little bit more or a little bit less, so you might want to have a little bit extra ready. Sometimes they use wine at this initial stage, and you'll notice how quickly it evaporates if we have a pan with a large surface area, so that's pretty important. If you have a small surface area in the pan or a narrow pan, it's going to take a long time for that rice to be absorbed, or to absorb the liquid. Now as this is working, let's look at the kind of rice that we're using and whether or not you have to use the traditional rice. This is the arborio rice on this area, and you can see that it's a medium grain rice, and it's very fat, and it is what is recommended by those people who are in Italy, because this is an Italian dish and that's an Italian rice, so you would expect them to use that kind of rice in their product. The next one, however, is a medium grain rice that's grown, California grows a lot of it in the United States. It's also grown in Asia. It will also work, and it's more commonly available in the supermarket, and it's much less expensive. It is different when you end up with it because it doesn't roll on the tongue quite as well, and so it gives you a little bit different experience. But it does work, so that if that's the kind of rice you can find in your market, you can use it equally well. Now, something you need to know about that kind of rice, however, is that it's less forgiving in the cooking process. It goes through the cook stage faster, and so you really need to pay attention to what's going on much more closely if you're using a medium grain rice. You could also use a short grain rice from the supermarket, and it would work too. Let's add a little bit more broth to this. The last rice there is what's known as a long grain rice, and it is what's typically grown in the southeast part of the United States. It tends to be higher in amylose than in amylopectin, and so it's more apt to give you the individual fluffy grains, less creaminess, works great for a lot of things, just not very well in risotto. So we're not going to use that here today. Now this is going to have to be cooked and not necessarily stirred constantly, but you need to keep an eye on it. It's going to have to cook somewhere between 15 to 18 minutes until most of the liquid is absorbed. When the rice reaches the al dente stage, which is actually one of the reasons that it's so important to stir, it makes your attention focus on this dish so that it's not as apt to overcook. You want to add the rest of the vegetables. Also, we're going to add a half a cup of baby peas. They could be frozen, defrosted, which I'm using here, or they could be fresh. I'm also going to add the 6 stalks of asparagus and about 1/4 of a cup of parsley that we've chopped up. And we're going to stir those together and just let them cook. We just want to basically warm the vegetables through here because we want them to be real nice and crispy as well. This will take 1 to 2 minutes. Remember, you still want the vegetables that you added at the end to have some crispness. At this point, we're going to remove it from the heat, stir in salt and pepper to taste. I'm adding about 1/2 teaspoon of each. It depends a little bit on what kind of broth you used. If you were diligent and had some homemade broth, or you use this low sodium variety, you're going to have to adjust the amount you use. I used a low sodium type here, but it's best to add it to taste. Then we're also going to add to this a tablespoon of plain yogurt to help make it be a little bit creamier. Now again, in some traditional recipes at this point they'd be adding another bit of butter just to sweeten it up and make it a little bit creamier. And then I've got 2 tablespoons of grated Parmesan cheese. Just stir this all one last time and we're ready to plate it. Now it's nice if you've got a nice big platter that you can use to serve it on, and something that'll give it a little bit of color contrast so that everybody can see that risotto primavera is in fact one of the flavors of spring and early summer. For Oklahoma Gardening, this is Barbara Brown.